Welcome back, friends. I'm your host Kennedy, and today on Most Amazing we are back again with part 4 of some of the most insane celebrity disappearances. Honestly, the sheer amount of these is terrifying. So without further ado, this is the top 10 missing celebrities we're still trying to find. Starting us off at number 10 is Dorothy Arnold. Although you might not know her now, back in 1910, Dorothy Arnold was a 25-year-old socialite and heiress to a perfume empire. So when the news broke that she suddenly disappeared in the middle of the day without a trace, it was an absolute scandal. Apparently at the time, Arnold had had a huge falling out with her father, who was refusing to let her move out of the house. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to him, she was having a secret affair with a man 20 years her senior and kept a secret P.O. box to write to him. But the really weird part about the whole situation is that after her strange disappearance, Dorothy's dad was allegedly so worried about the bad publicity that the scandal might bring upon the family, he was reluctant to bring the case to the police for several months. Instead, he hired his own PI, who sadly was never able to uncover any leads to where his daughter could be hiding. Of course, at the time, there were plenty of rumors circulating about the socialite's whereabouts. Some believed her secret beau had offed her, while others thought she maybe took her own life. Another popular theory was that she had been secretly pregnant and ran away to avoid social embarrassment. But as she was never found, alive or dead, the mystery continues to this day. Coming in at number 9 is Art Scholl. After a lucrative 18-year career as an air show stunt pilot and an aeronautics instructor at San Bernardino Valley College, Art Scholl pivoted his career into the flashy spotlight of Hollywood and eventually became recognized as the most in-demand stunt pilot in the business. While nowadays we're blessed with CGI, before this technology existed, there was only one way to get a thrilling airplane sequence: a really good pilot. And more often than not, it was Art they called. Over the years, he worked on projects like The Right Stuff, The Great Waldo Pepper, Blue Thunder, The A-Team, Chips, Iron Eagle, and Top Gun. Sadly, it was while filming for Top Gun when Art, while performing an upside-down spin maneuver, lost control of his plane and reported via radio that there was a real problem. From there, it's believed the plane crashed into the Pacific Ocean. Now, to be fair, there is a debate around whether or not Art should be considered a missing person or not, as it's highly unlikely he survived the crash. But after a major investigation was unable to uncover his remains or the plane in question, the truth remained a mysterious, unsolved case. Coming in at number 8 is Slim Wintermute. Back in 1939, the National Collegiate Athletics Association, or NCAA, held its first ever men's college basketball tournament. As is often the case with firsts, the players from the winning team at the University of Oregon, sometimes called Tall Furs, became kind of low-key celebrities in the area. One of these famed Tall Furs was center player Ergel Slim Wintermute, because he could dunk the ball, something that was apparently quite the novelty at the time. Sadly, however, after college, Wintermute didn't hit the big leagues. Instead, he ended up working for an airplane manufacturer in Seattle, got married, had 3 kids, and lived a happy, quiet little life. But in October of 1977, he would once again become a well-known man, but this time for a much more tragic reason. At the age of 60, Wintermute and a friend went out to enjoy a little boat trip on a nearby lake. However, the next morning, when his friend awoke, he found that he was left all alone on the vessel. Wintermute nowhere in sight. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to the man, whether he fell overboard or mysteriously ran away. And as no remains were ever discovered, we'll never be able to fully confirm what happened. Coming in at number 7 is Licorice McKechnie. During the late 1960s, the Incredible String Band was a popular, folksy, hippie meets psychedelic rock band that was founded by Robin Williamson, Mike Herron, and Clive Palmer. However, long story short, Clive ended up leaving the band, and the now duo ended up adding their respective girlfriends to the group, and over time they managed to enjoy some moderate success in the lower runs of the Billboard album chart. It was Robinson's girlfriend, Scottish musician Christina "Licorice" McKechnie, who by 1968 was considered a fully fledged member, usually performing as a backup singer or percussionist. In fact, she actually performed with the band at the 1969 Woodstock. But in 1972, after her relationship with Robinson had dwindled, McKechnie left the band and went on to other things. A few years went by, she found a new band, got married, got divorced, and then mysteriously vanished in 1987. All that is known is that in 1986, she went back home to Scotland to visit family, but according to her sister, she returned back to America. Her last official sighting is believed to be in 1987, hitchhiking across the Arizona desert, but no one has ever heard from her since. Coming in at number 6 is Glenn Miller. Although he first recorded in 1935, it took a few years, as it does with most artists, for Glenn Miller to establish himself as a great musician. Lucky for Glenn, after some time his band began doing really well for themselves, and after performing at Glen Island Casino in New York, they began to really rise up the ladder. By 1940, they were dominating the radio with hit songs like In the Mood and Tuxedo Junction, eventually earning him a baffling 15 to 20K a week for his career. But his promising career was all forced to a halt in 1942 when he joined the US Army in World War II. Luckily, while assigned, Glenn was able to lead the Army Air Force Band, inspiring and boosting morale for the troops he fought alongside. That was until he mysteriously vanished one chilly December in 1944. Stationed in England at the time, Glenn had learned that his band was to head over to Paris, and so on December 15th, Glenn followed orders and boarded a transport plane that was headed to the French capital. But strangely, Glenn never arrived in Paris that day. In fact, Glenn was never seen again. And even more curious was that no trace of the plane crash was ever found, nor have any remains ever been uncovered. Coming in at number 5 is Solomon Northup. Solomon Northup was the son of a freed slave and a free woman of color, subsequently making him a free man from his birth in 1807. That was until 1841 when he was offered a traveling musician's job and made his way over to Washington, D.C., where slavery was legal, and was drugged, kidnapped, and sold as a slave. From there, he was shipped to New Orleans, where he was eventually purchased by the cruel and brutal Edwin Epps and kept as a slave for 12 years. After breaking free with the help of Samuel Bass, Solomon went on to write the famed novel 12 Years a Slave in 1853, selling 30,000 copies in the first 2 years. Then in 1857, after embarking on a speaking tour in Canada, Solomon was never seen again. There were a number of theories surrounding his disappearance, some believing he became a spy for the Union Army, while most tend to guess he worked on the Underground Railroad aiding other slaves to escape to Canada. While we can safely say he has since died, there was never any documentation made of his death and no official burial, meaning no one really knows where he went or what he was up to in his last few years. Next up at number 4 is Amelia Earhart. Although I would venture to say this woman needs no introduction, just in case you aren't familiar, in 1932, Amelia Earhart was the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean unaccompanied, and was just overall an incredible woman. On top of her 1932 trip, she was one of the first aviators to promote commercial air travel, she wrote best-selling books about her flying experiences, and was instrumental in the formation of the 99s, which was an organization for female pilots. Essentially, she was a super cool badass pilot in the 30s, which made her disappearance all the more bone-chilling. In 1937, Amelia decided to set out on one of the greatest expeditions to date. She was going to be the first woman to fly all the way around the globe. Determined to make history along with her navigator Fred Noonan, Amelia left Miami June 1st and headed towards New Guinea. By the next day, they made it, and from there the plan was to head towards Howland Island, which was a small, uninhabited landmass between Hawaii and Australia. But somewhere en route to the next destination, caught in a bad storm with a low fuel tank, Amelia tragically lost contact with her Coast Guard liaison, and literally literally vanished into thin air. From what anyone has ever been able to find, the plane never landed, and neither her nor Fred were ever seen again. Coming in at our number 3 spot is Theodosia Burr, daughter of the 3rd Vice President of the United States, Aaron Burr. If you have ever heard of a little Broadway musical called Hamilton, or just happen to be a history buff, then you may already be familiar with Miss Theodosia Burr. But one thing they left out in the show was that Theodosia mysteriously vanished from the spotlight in 1813. Apparently, during her time, she turned out to be quite a controversial figure. After Hamilton alluded that her father had an relationship with the girl, it's believed that this is what led to the duel where Burr killed Hamilton, and Theodosia subsequently helping her father flee the country. But from there, her life only got worse. It's believed the young woman suffered uterine cancer, and on top of that, wrote to her doctors sharing symptoms of hysterical fits, seeing figures in the night, witnessing flashes of light, and hearing strange noises. But once her son passed from malaria, sending her into a deep depression, Theodosia decided she was going to go and visit her father, who she desperately missed. One day she boarded the Patriot, a small boat that was scheduled to take her from Georgetown to New York, where her father had recently returned. But curiously, the boat never arrived in New York. In fact, the boat never arrived anywhere as far as anyone could find. It was as if it vanished into another dimension. To this day, the disappearance of Theodosia Burr remains a great mystery. Coming in at our number 2 spot is Ambrose Small. A great Canadian theater magnate from the early 20th century, Ambrose Small remains one of the biggest unsolved cases of a missing person. On December 1st, 1919, Ambrose sold all his theater holdings at a profit of $1.7 million. A large amount of money now, let alone over 100 years ago. The next day, he met with a lawyer, F.W.M. Flock, at the Grand Opera House, and at 5:30 p.m., Flock left, and would be the last person to ever see Ambrose. Later that night, Ambrose mysteriously left his office and disappeared forever. And despite his building being right downtown, police were never able to find anyone who saw him leave. At the time he vanished, Small, who was 53, owned 7 theaters as well as another 62 buildings, was a self-made millionaire, and had no clear motive to be on the run. The mogul took none of his money with him, and without a ransom note or any evidence pointing towards a kidnapping, police were stumped. At first, his wife Teresa assumed he was off gallivanting with a younger woman, but after a few weeks, his lengthy absence began to concern her, so she offered a $50,000 reward to anyone with information regarding his whereabouts if he was found alive, and $15,000 if found dead. The reward was never claimed, and Ambrose was never found. And last up in our number 1 spot is Bobby Dunbar. While he may not have been famous at the time he disappeared, the case of Bobby Dunbar became a national sensation when 8 months later, he was found. The year was 1912, and Bobby Dunbar was a mere 4 years old when he disappeared on a family holiday in Louisiana. Considering his age, people were extremely worried, and so hundreds of volunteers began searching for the little one. Allegedly, people went as far as slicing open the bellies of alligators to check if he had been eaten. Initially, the searches proved fruitless, and it was starting to look more and more like young Bobby was kidnapped, until 8 months later, he was found alive and well in the care of William Walters. At the time, Walters was found guilty for abducting Bobby, after his parents claimed it was their missing son. But Walters insisted he had done no such thing and that the boy was his very own son. However, as Walters and his wife could not afford a lawyer, the courts favored the Dunbar family and sentenced the alleged kidnapper to life in prison. However, as it turns out, he only ended up serving for 2 years. Still, for years it was believed that was all there really was to the story. Until a DNA test in 2004 proved definitively that the boy who had been found under Walter's care was not Bobby Dunbar, meaning that it very likely really was the son of William Walter, and that Bobby's parents somehow mistook this boy for their own son, or at least knew that they were lying about it not being theirs. But scariest of all, it meant that the young Bobby was never actually found. Well, there you have it, guys. I hope you liked this video. If you did, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you next time.